Thomas Mitchell had served the British royal family for 15 years. Every morning at 5:30, he would put on his red uniform, polish his boots until they shined like mirrors, and take his position outside the palace gates. His job was simple but important: protect the royal family with his life. At 42 years old, Thomas was one of the most respected guards in the entire palace. Other guards looked up to him. Tourists would take pictures of him standing perfectly still for hours. Children would wave at him, hoping he might smile back, though he never did while on duty. Thomas came from a military family. His father was a soldier, his grandfather was a soldier, and his great-grandfather fought in World War II. Protecting important people was in his blood. When he first got the job at Buckingham Palace, his mother cried with pride. "Our Tommy is guarding the Queen herself," she would tell the neighbors. Life as a royal guard was not easy. Thomas had to stand in the same spot for hours without moving. Rain or shine, hot or cold, he remained at his post. He could not talk to tourists, could not scratch his nose, could not even blink too much. His feet would hurt terribly by the end of each shift, but he never complained. The other guards respected Thomas because he never broke the rules. Some younger guards would sometimes whisper to each other when no one was watching, or would slightly relax their posture when they got tired. But not Thomas. He stood like a statue from morning until evening. Thomas lived alone in a small apartment near the palace. He had been married once, but his wife left him 5 years ago. She said he cared more about his job than their marriage. "You're like a robot, Tommy," she had said the day she packed her bags. "You've forgotten how to be human." The words hurt him deeply, but Thomas believed his duty came first. Protecting the royal family was not just a job, it was his calling in life. He had sworn an oath to serve, and he would keep that promise no matter what. Every day was the same routine. Wake up, exercise, eat breakfast, put on uniform, stand guard, go home, sleep, repeat. Thomas liked the routine. It made him feel important and needed. When tourists pointed at him and took photos, he felt proud to represent his country. But lately, something had been bothering Thomas. He noticed that Prince George, who was now 10 years old, would often walk past the guards on his way to school. Most royal children ignored the guards completely, treating them like furniture. But Prince George was different. The young prince would always slow down when he passed Thomas. Sometimes he would nod slightly, other times he would give a small wave. Thomas, following protocol, would never respond. He was trained to look straight ahead and ignore everything around him unless there was danger. One rainy Tuesday morning, Thomas noticed Prince George walking slower than usual. The boy seemed sad about something. His shoulders were down, and he was looking at the ground instead of walking with his usual confidence. Thomas wanted to ask if everything was okay, but guards were strictly forbidden from speaking to any member of the royal family unless spoken to first. As Prince George passed by, he dropped his school bag. Books and papers scattered across the wet pavement. The prince looked around, clearly expecting someone to help him collect his things. His nanny was nowhere to be seen, probably running late from their car. Thomas felt his heart racing. Every instinct told him to help the young prince, but his training held him back. Royal guards must never leave their position. They must never interact with the royal family unless there was immediate danger. These rules had been drilled into his head for 15 years. Prince George got down on his knees in the rain, trying to gather his soaked homework and textbooks. Some papers were blowing away in the wind. The boy looked frustrated and was clearly fighting back tears. Other people walking by pretended not to notice, not wanting to interfere with royal business. Thomas stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead, but inside he was screaming. This was just a child who needed help. His own training and rules seemed suddenly cruel and inhuman. The prince was struggling, getting wetter by the minute, and no one was helping him. After what felt like forever, Prince George managed to collect most of his things. As he stood up, muddy and soaked, he looked directly at Thomas. Their eyes met for just a moment. In that brief glance, Thomas saw something that shook him to his core. The prince was not angry that Thomas had not helped. Instead, there was understanding in his young eyes. Prince George seemed to know that the guard wanted to help, but could not. The boy nodded slightly as if to say, "I understand," then walked away to catch up with his nanny. That moment changed everything for Thomas. For the first time in 15 years, he questioned whether following rules was more important than showing basic human kindness. That night, he could not sleep. He kept seeing the prince's understanding eyes and felt ashamed of his inaction. The next morning, Thomas put on his uniform as usual, but his mind was troubled. He had always believed that being a perfect soldier meant following orders without question. But now he wondered if being a good person meant something different entirely. As he took his position at the palace gates, Thomas noticed that Prince George's nanny was carrying the boy's bag for him. The prince walked with his hands in his pockets, looking thoughtful. When he passed Thomas, he slowed down again and gave that same small nod of understanding. Thomas realized that this 10-year-old boy was teaching him something important about compassion and humanity. The prince could have complained about the guard who refused to help him. He could have gotten Thomas in trouble. Instead, he showed maturity and forgiveness that impressed the experienced soldier. From that day forward, Thomas began to see his role differently. He was still committed to protecting the royal family, but he started to understand that true service meant more than just following rules blindly. It meant caring about the people you are sworn to protect as human beings, not just as important symbols. The seed of change had been planted in Thomas's mind, though he did not yet know how dramatically his life was about to change. 3 weeks after the rainy incident, Thomas was assigned to indoor duty at the palace. This was unusual for him, as he typically worked the outer gates. But one of the guards inside had called in sick, and Thomas was asked to fill in for the day. His new position was in the main hallway where the royal family often walked to reach different parts of the palace. It was considered an honor to guard this area, as it meant the senior officers trusted him completely. Thomas felt proud as he took his place near a large portrait of Queen Victoria. The hallway was quiet most of the morning. Occasionally, palace staff would walk by carrying documents or cleaning supplies. Thomas stood at attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead, just as he had been trained. The indoor duty was easier on his feet, but required the same level of discipline and alertness. Around noon, he heard familiar footsteps approaching. Prince George was walking down the hallway with his tutor, carrying a stack of books. They were discussing something about history class, and the prince seemed much happier than he had on that rainy day weeks earlier. As they passed Thomas, something unexpected happened. Prince George stopped walking and turned to face the guard directly. His tutor also stopped, looking surprised by the prince's sudden pause. "Good afternoon," Prince George said politely to Thomas. According to protocol, Thomas should have remained silent and continued staring straight ahead. Guards were not supposed to engage in conversation with royalty unless there was an emergency. But the prince had spoken directly to him, and ignoring a member of the royal family completely would also be considered disrespectful. Thomas made a quick decision. He gave a slight nod and replied, "Good afternoon, Your Royal Highness." The prince smiled at this response. His tutor looked a bit uncomfortable but did not interrupt. Prince George then said something that caught Thomas completely off guard. "I wanted to thank you for your service," the young prince said sincerely. "I know standing guard all day must be very difficult, especially when it rains." The comment about rain was clearly a reference to the day when Thomas had been unable to help with the dropped school bag. Thomas felt his chest tighten with emotion. The prince was not only acknowledging what had happened, but he was showing appreciation for the guard's position rather than resentment. "It is my honor to serve, Your Royal Highness." Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. Prince George nodded thoughtfully. I was wondering, he continued, do you ever get to take breaks during your long shifts? This was not a question Thomas had expected. The prince seemed genuinely concerned about the welfare of the palace guards. Most royals never thought about such practical matters concerning the staff who served them. We have scheduled breaks, Your Royal Highness, Thomas answered truthfully. The palace takes good care of us. That's good to hear, Prince George said. I sometimes see guards standing for hours and wonder if they're comfortable. It must require great strength and dedication. Thomas was amazed by the prince's thoughtfulness. Here was a 10-year-old boy who noticed the humanity in the people around him, even those who were supposed to be invisible. The prince saw Thomas as a person, not just a uniformed decoration. The tutor gently cleared his throat, indicating that they should continue on their way. Prince George understood the hint, but took one more moment to speak to Thomas. I hope you have a pleasant rest of your day, the prince said with genuine warmth. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. You as well, Thomas replied. As Prince George and his tutor continued down the hallway, Thomas remained at his post, but his mind was racing. In his 15 years of service, no member of the royal family had ever spoken to him with such consideration and respect. Most treated the guards as if they were not there at all. The conversation stayed with Thomas for the rest of his shift. He began to think about the contrast between the rigid rules he lived by and the natural kindness that Prince George had shown. The boy had not been following any protocol when he stopped to chat. He had simply acted on his instinct to treat another person with dignity. That evening, Thomas went home to his empty apartment and sat in his favorite chair, still thinking about the day's interaction. He realized that Prince George had managed to accomplish something remarkable with just a few simple words. The prince had made him feel valued as a human being, not just as a security guard. Thomas began to reflect on his years of service. He had always believed that the highest form of duty was to follow orders without question, to suppress his own personality, and become a perfect soldier. But Prince George seemed to appreciate him as an individual, not as a robot programmed to stand still. Over the following days, Thomas found himself hoping for another chance to guard the indoor hallways. He wanted to see if Prince George would acknowledge him again, or if the conversation had been a one-time occurrence. His wish was granted the following Tuesday when he was again assigned to indoor duty. Sure enough, Prince George walked through the hallway that afternoon. This time he was alone, carrying what appeared to be art supplies. When he spotted Thomas, his face lit up with recognition. "Hello again," Prince George said as he approached. "How are you today?" "Very well, Your Royal Highness. Thank you for asking," Thomas replied, feeling more comfortable with the interaction this time. "I was just coming from art class," the prince explained, holding up his supplies. "We're learning about different painting techniques." "Do you have any interest in art?" The question surprised Thomas. No royal had ever asked about his personal interests before. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure whether it was appropriate to share such information. "I enjoy visiting museums when I have time off," Thomas said honestly. "I find history paintings particularly interesting." "That's wonderful," Prince George exclaimed. "I love history too, especially learning about how people lived in different time periods. Maybe that's why I find the palace guard so fascinating. You're like living history, carrying on traditions that go back hundreds of years." Thomas had never thought of his job in quite that way. Prince George was helping him see his role from a completely different perspective. Instead of just following old rules, he was participating in something meaningful and historically significant. "I never considered it that way, Your Royal Highness," Thomas admitted. "Well, I think what you do is quite special," Prince George said. "Not everyone would be willing to dedicate their life to protecting others. It shows great character." These words hit Thomas deeply. The prince was not just being polite, he seemed to genuinely admire the sacrifice and commitment that came with being a royal guard. For the first time in years, Thomas felt truly proud of his service, not just dutiful. As Prince George continued on his way, Thomas stood a little straighter at his post. The young prince had given him something precious, a sense of purpose and dignity that went beyond simply following orders. Thomas realized that true honor came not from blind obedience, but from the intention to serve others with courage and integrity. That night, Thomas called his mother for the first time in several months. She was delighted to hear from him and asked about his work at the palace. "Mum," Thomas said, "I think I'm starting to understand what this job really means. It's not just about standing guard. It's about being part of something bigger than myself." His mother was pleased to hear the enthusiasm in his voice. "You sound different, Tommy," she said. "Happier somehow." Thomas smiled. "I think I'm learning some important lessons from an unexpected teacher," he said, thinking of Prince George. As he prepared for bed that night, Thomas felt a sense of anticipation for the first time in years. He was curious to see what other insights the young prince might share with him. Little did he know that their growing connection would soon lead him to make the most difficult decision of his entire career. 2 months had passed since Thomas's first real conversation with Prince George. During that time, they had spoken briefly on several occasions when the prince passed through the hallways. Each conversation was proper and respectful, but Thomas could tell that a genuine mutual respect had developed between them. Prince George would often share interesting facts he had learned in his studies, while Thomas would occasionally mention historical details about the palace that the prince found fascinating. Their exchanges never lasted more than a few minutes, but they had become the highlight of Thomas's working days. One Thursday afternoon, Thomas was stationed near the palace library when he overheard a conversation that would change everything. Prince George was talking with his private secretary about a school project on social justice and equality. "I want to write about people who serve others," Prince George was saying, "but I want to focus on how we can make sure they're treated fairly and with dignity." The secretary suggested he might write about teachers or healthcare workers, but Prince George had a different idea. "I want to write about the palace guards," he said. "I've been thinking about how hard they work and whether we do enough to show them appreciation." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. The prince was thinking about writing a school project about guards like him, but what came next made him even more emotional. "I've been talking with one of the guards, Thomas Mitchell," Prince George continued. "He's taught me so much about dedication and service. I think people like him deserve more recognition for what they do." The secretary seemed surprised. "You've been talking with the guards, Your Royal Highness?" "Just brief conversations," Prince George explained. "But I've learned that they're real people with real feelings and interests. They're not just decorations or security equipment. They have families and dreams and concerns just like everyone else." Thomas couldn't believe what he was hearing. Prince George was advocating for guards to be treated as human beings, not just uniformed symbols. The boy was using his royal platform to promote compassion and understanding. "That's a very thoughtful perspective, Your Royal Highness," the secretary said. "I'm sure your teachers will be impressed with your maturity on this subject." After they moved on, Thomas stood at his post with tears in his eyes. No one in his 15 years of service had ever spoken about guards with such respect and humanity. Prince George was not just being kind to him personally. The prince was developing a philosophy of leadership based on treating all people with dignity. That evening, Thomas went home and sat in his quiet apartment, thinking deeply about his life and career. Prince George's words had planted an idea in his mind that wouldn't go away. The young prince was going to grow up to be a leader who valued compassion and human dignity. Thomas wanted to be part of that future, but not necessarily in the same role he had always played. For the first time, Thomas began to imagine a different kind of service. Maybe he could find a way to help people that didn't require standing silently for hours. Maybe his military experience and his newfound appreciation for human dignity could be put to use in other ways. The following week, Thomas made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He requested a meeting with his commanding officer to discuss his future with the Royal Guard. Captain Williams was shocked when Thomas explained his intentions. "You're one of our best guards, Mitchell," he said. "Why would you want to leave now?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "Sir, my time here has taught me valuable lessons about service and leadership. I've come to believe that I can contribute more to society by applying these lessons in a different way." "What are you planning to do?" Captain Williams asked. "I want to work with young people, sir," Thomas said. "I think my military background and my experience here could be useful in helping disadvantaged youth learn about discipline, respect, and finding purpose in life." Captain Williams studied Thomas's face, seeing a determination and clarity that hadn't been there before. "This is quite a change from the man who lived and breathed royal protocol," he observed. "Yes, sir," Thomas agreed. "I've learned that following rules is important, but understanding why we serve others is even more important. I want to help young people discover their own potential for service and leadership." The captain was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If this is really what you want, I won't stand in your way. You've given us 15 years of exemplary service. You've earned the right to choose your own path." Thomas felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Leaving the Royal Guard would be like leaving family, but he knew in his heart that it was the right decision. Before submitting his official resignation, Thomas wanted to do one last thing. He wrote a letter to Prince George, explaining his decision and thanking the young prince for the lessons he had taught him. He gave the letter to the prince's private secretary, hoping it would reach its intended recipient. 3 days later, something extraordinary happened. Thomas was working his final week of shifts when Prince George appeared in the hallway, carrying a folded piece of paper. The prince approached Thomas directly, which was unusual since there were other palace staff nearby. "I received your letter," Prince George said quietly. "I wanted to speak with you before you leave." Thomas felt nervous and honored at the same time. "Your Royal Highness, it was important for me to explain my decision." Prince George unfolded the paper he was carrying. "I wrote you a reply," he said, handing it to Thomas. "I wanted you to know how much our conversations have meant to me, too." Thomas accepted the letter with shaking hands. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. May I read it later?" "Of course," Prince George said. "But I want to tell you something in person. You've taught me that real leadership means seeing the humanity in everyone around you. When I grow up and have royal responsibilities, I'll remember the lessons you've taught me about treating people with respect and dignity." Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes. "Your Royal Highness, you have it backwards. You taught me those lessons. You showed me that following rules without compassion is not true service." Prince George smiled. "Then we taught each other," he said. "I think that's what good friends do." The word friends hit Thomas like lightning. A member of the royal family had just called him a friend. It was unprecedented and deeply moving. "I wish you great success in your new career," Prince George continued. "I hope you'll help many young people discover their potential, just as you helped me understand mine." "I will do my best, Your Royal Highness," Thomas promised. As Prince George walked away, Thomas carefully tucked the letter into his uniform pocket. Later that evening, in the privacy of his apartment, he read the prince's handwritten note. The letter was brief, but profound. Prince George wrote about how their conversations had helped him develop his own ideas about leadership and service. He thanked Thomas for treating him like a normal person while still showing proper respect. Most importantly, he encouraged Thomas to follow his heart and pursue his new career with confidence. Thomas kept that letter for the rest of his life. On his last day as a Royal Guard, Thomas put on his red uniform one final time. As he stood at his post, he reflected on how much he had changed during his years of service. He had started as a rigid soldier who followed orders without question. He was leaving as a man who understood that true service comes from the heart, not just from duty. 6 months later, Thomas was working as a youth counselor at a community center in London. He used his military discipline and organizational skills to help troubled teenagers find direction in their lives. Many of the young people he worked with came from difficult backgrounds and had never learned to trust authority figures. But Thomas's approach was different. He treated each teenager with the same respect and dignity that Prince George had shown him. He listened to their problems, acknowledged their humanity, and helped them discover their own potential for making positive contributions to society. One afternoon, while working with a particularly difficult group of teenagers, Thomas received an unexpected visitor. Prince George, now 11 years old, arrived at the community center with his security detail for an official visit. When Prince George saw Thomas, his face lit up with genuine happiness. "Thomas!" he called out, then caught himself and said more formally, "Mr. Mitchell, it's wonderful to see you." Thomas felt his heart swell with pride as he watched Prince George interact with the teenagers. The young prince spoke to each one individually, asking about their interests and goals. He treated them with the same respect and curiosity he had shown Thomas in the palace hallways. After the visit, Prince George made a point of speaking privately with Thomas. "You're doing exactly what I hoped you would do," the prince said. "These young people need someone who believes in them. You're giving them what you gave me, the feeling that they matter as individuals." Thomas smiled. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Your visit today meant everything to these kids. They'll never forget that a member of the royal family took time to really listen to them." "I learned from the best," Prince George replied with a grin. As Thomas watched the prince's motorcade drive away, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had left his position as a royal guard, but he had found something even more valuable, a life dedicated to serving others with compassion and understanding. The teenager who had seemed most skeptical during the prince's visit approached Thomas later that day. "Mr. Mitchell," the boy said, "that prince really seemed to care about what we had to say. Is he for real, or was it just for show?" Thomas smiled. Thinking about all the conversations he had shared with Prince George in the palace hallways. "He's for real," Thomas said confidently. "That young man is going to grow up to be a leader who truly cares about people. Mark my words, when he's older, he'll be the kind of royal who makes a real difference in the world." Thomas was right. Years later, as Prince George grew into his royal responsibilities, he became known for his genuine connection with people from all walks of life. He never forgot the lessons he learned from a royal guard who chose compassion over protocol and who taught him that true leadership means seeing the humanity in everyone you serve. And Thomas never regretted his decision to leave the royal guard. He had found his true calling, helping others discover their own potential for service, dignity, and compassion. The young prince's calm but influential example had shown him that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is to follow their heart and choose kindness over convention.